Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Stackis and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. We're excited that you're able to join us for today's webinar on Intrapreneurship, the missing key to innovation success, presented by Dan Goodman, CEO of Relativity Sciences, Inc. This webinar is part of the Smith Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development webinar series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you may have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit these questions throughout the session, and Dan will address them at the end of the presentation. Dan Goodman is a lifelong entrepreneur and has founded 15 companies. He is the CEO of Relativity Sciences, Inc., a consulting and training firm focused on entrepreneurship, innovation, and customer intimacy for Fortune 500 companies. Dan also serves as the entrepreneur in residence for the University of Maryland's $560 million Division of Research and was the Smith School Entrepreneur in Residence Emeritus and an Entrepreneur in Residence at the Dingman Center. He is a graduate of the Clark School of Engineering and serves on the board of its Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. And now we'll get started. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Entrepreneurship is a topic very dear to my heart, and I'm happy to be able to share some things with you that I've learned over the years. So what we'll talk about today is the following. What's the nature of innovation within large organizations? Why are attempts at innovation in these environments so rarely successful? And what are entrepreneurial attributes, skills, and behaviors that make people entrepreneurs? And why are those people so critical to innovation efforts? We'll also talk about how you can identify the entrepreneurs within your organization and how you can improve the innovation success rate within your organization. And beyond that, how do you grow a culture of entrepreneurship so that it becomes baked into everything your company does? And personally, how can you build up your entrepreneurial muscles? So I'll tell you just a little bit about my journey into entrepreneurship. As Danielle mentioned, I've been an entrepreneur almost all of my adult life. And I've spent about 20 years consulting for and coaching early stage entrepreneurs and companies. In 2007, Northrop Grumman's Vice President of Business Development for one of their divisions came to the Clark School and said, we're having a hard time with some of our personnel. We're feeling calcified. We're not thinking entrepreneurially. Have you got anybody that could help us change how we think and act within the company? And they connected them to me. And that began a journey into this topic that's lasted till this day. I spent 8 years consulting with Northrop on innovation, entrepreneurship, and customer intimacy initiatives, 2 to 3 years apiece in different parts of the company across the country. Northrop Grumman is about 68,000 employees, so it's a very large company. It's very disparate, does many different things. And they were trying to innovate on a number of different fronts. Since that time, I've worked with a number of other large organizations, and I've gotten to observe quite a bit about what the struggles are in trying to spur innovation within these kinds of large organizations, and how critical entrepreneurship has become for success in the innovation domain. Let me offer a brief disclaimer and say that I don't claim that my perspective here is valid in all circumstances. The topic of entrepreneurship and innovation, both those topics are just too complex to be definitive about for all situations. These insights do, however, reflect what my colleagues and I have learned over the years, and we're continually learning more. So if you have experiences or opinions that counter to what I'll share today, I'd love to discuss them with you, and please reach out to me afterwards. So because this is such a large topic, let me scope it down a little bit to just large, mature organizations. When you talk about the startup realm or even mid-stage companies, things are quite a bit different. So what we've spent our time doing is focusing on very large organizations and the specific difficulties they have, excuse me, in innovating. And those innovations can be products, service offerings, business models, customer experience, internal processes, or other things. One tends to think about innovation strictly in terms of product development, but really it extends across the entire domain of business operations. And also the scope that we'll talk about today occurs after the ideation and vetting phase. So ideation is the creation of the ideas or the pooling of those ideas. And for example, I briefed the U.S. Air Force's innovation leaders at the Pentagon a few years ago on some of these topics, and through their ideation and vetting exercise, they had gathered up 110,000 ideas and spent over 3 years, 5 full-time employees, just doing the vetting. So we're not going to talk about the creation of ideas or the vetting part, just about the execution thereafter. I will say that those organizations that we have worked with and that are included in the scope include academia, government, nonprofit, as well as corporate, although what you'll see mostly is a discussion of the corporate environment. Academia and government are particularly in need of a lot of the entrepreneurial initiatives that we'll discuss. But in general, in the corporate environment, the business environment is evolving, as we all know. Speed of operations, the competition, barrier to entry has lowered in many industries, so the competition has been accelerated. Industry disruptions abound. Quick list of just the ones off the top of my head, but there are many, many other disruptors today that are changing the nature of business at an ever-accelerating rate. Here's a quote from one of our Fortune 500 customers. He said, "What keeps me up at night is my fear that there's a 15-year-old in their basement somewhere about to disrupt our entire industry." And that's an existential threat. Not one of our clients, but Disney CEO Bob Iger said the riskiest thing we can do is just maintain the status quo. And that's ever more true in business today. So here's a well-known 7-stage business life cycle graph. And what we're going to focus on is the green area, if you can see it in the mature and innovate decline part of the graph to the right. And it does show that you have a choice after you get to a mature stage, and you can either innovate or die, as Peter Drucker said many years ago. Some of the companies who didn't heed that message are well known: Blockbuster, Sears, Kodak, Barnes & Noble, BlackBerry, and Circuit City, which was co-founded by my grandfather. So that was particularly painful to me that they were unable to innovate against the competition. A study from the Olin School of Business at Washington University a couple of years ago estimated that 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist in a mere 10 years. So that is existential threat, and it is why companies need to innovate if they're to continue. So organizations evolve towards stability and optimization of profit. That's sort of the nature of big business. Companies want to get to be smooth, well-oiled machines that generate dividends and profits, and they don't like things that distract them from that. So they want to stay on that path until they're forced to innovate, and that's typically either because they want to protect market share or grow. staying the same, not doing anything, not innovating is typically not a successful strategy. But innovation means change. It requires changing something, and mature organizations, they organically resist that. That's just not how they think and how they're built. Typically, there are some companies, notable examples, that get out in front of that and have innovation baked into their DNA from an early age. Those are not common, and those are not the organizations that typically reach out to us. So I don't spend a lot of time inside those typically more healthy, more successful at innovation companies. So the perspective I have is from organizations that are not intrinsically innovative and have struggled with it. So change represents some kind of destabilization, embodies some type of risk, and that causes sort of a bipolar disorder within a large organization. Even if it has decided that it wants to become innovative, there's a very long lag time within large cultures before everyone, if ever, everyone gets on board. So there's the components of these large organizations that will resist whatever components are trying to make change. And that's sort of almost a mental illness kind of thing, because there are internal stresses caused by innovation. And innovation by its nature is messy and chaotic, and it's particularly messy the farther along the spectrum you go from incremental innovation to disruptive innovation. The more disruptive, the more chaotic. And as human beings, we typically dislike change. The vast majority of humans, search out stability in their lives, and change is stressful. Corporate innovation is a team sport, though. It's different from the single innovator in their garage. It really is a group effort, and in all of the organizations we've worked with, innovation teams have been set up in order to pursue some of these vetted ideas that have come through the ideation phase. And risk is always involved. Failure is a possibility, and depending on the mindset of the people running the innovation strategy, if you are adopting a fail fast, fail often, iterate kind of science project mentality, science experiment mentality, then failure is guaranteed, and you're not doing it right unless you are failing. And big organizations' cultures typically have looked at failure as something very bad, and that they try very, very hard not to have. So that takes a considerable change in mindset. Once big organizations decide to innovate and set up innovation processes and teams, they're generally made up of people whose job hasn't been typically innovation. So there are people who are new at attempting it. Very few companies do have seasoned innovation experts managing these operations. And ideas are easy. Execution is hard. That's true throughout life. It's very easy to come up with ideas. It's very, very difficult to realize them. So these are the top 7 reasons why we have witnessed innovation initiatives fail, and why it's so very difficult for companies to be successful with their innovations. In ascending order of importance, number 7 is missing or misaligned incentives for the participants and their managers. And if in personnel reviews, a contribution to an employee's innovation efforts aren't counted or as part of their promotion criteria, many employees just won't put in the effort. And that's reasonable. People typically spend their effort in ways that are recognized and rewarded. If managers are incentivized on the productivity of their people, you think about a call center, for example, the number of calls that your 50 people that report to the manager can make in a month is something that he or she is incentivized on. And if those employees are then going to be spending some of their time on non-core functions, such as innovation, that manager will not typically be supportive of the effort. Number 6 is the lack of employee time dedicated to innovation. Innovation is a very time-consuming set of tasks. Management generally wildly underestimates the time necessary to do it. And even if the incentives are correct and aligned to make people want to contribute, if they aren't explicitly given time carved out of their schedules or charge numbers for their time in organizations where there's time cost accounting, it's very difficult for them to do so. Number 5 is innovation process friction. So trying to over-codify or over-engineer the innovation process makes it much more difficult and time-consuming to work through. I've seen innovation process flowcharts with 178 steps on it, and it is so overwhelming to view this thing that if it's handed to you when you sign up for an innovation project, you're like, wow, this is mind-bogglingly complex. And that's typically put in place to try and de-risk and de-chaos an innovation process, but it has an unintended consequence of making it so difficult to do that it often complicates the process and repels people. Also, depending on the kind of innovation that you're doing, it can be very difficult to pre-plan how it's going to go, and different types of innovation have very different pathways and processes. So mapping that all out is an extremely complex task. Number 4 would be the lack of appropriate messaging from senior leadership. So senior leadership can't just say, we need to innovate, go do it. It needs to be repeated over and over. It needs to be compelling, needs to contain the future vision for the organization. Why are we doing this? What's going to happen? Why is it good for us? Why is it good for our customers? Why is it good for you, the employee? And people need to believe that management has made a long-term commitment to support innovation. I heard a group president once say, I made an announcement. How many times do I need to say it? Like a one-time, we're going to innovate message was enough. And it's really not. It's a concern that people have that, oh, this is another flavor of the month initiative, and I'm not going to lean into it because next month they'll move on to something else. So number 3, if the culture is non-innovative or anti-innovative, as in there's too high a density of people who are wedded to the status quo, their expectations for not rocking the boat, trust in leadership is low, or that perception that this is an initiative of the month. If those are the case, it's going to be very difficult for people to commit the effort, creativity, time, and focus that they need to be successful. Number 2 is lack of training in how to vet and progress good ideas. There are tools and techniques such as a modified lean startup methodology that we use that really help people in being able to understand how to move things forward. And without that, that can be, and I've often seen people end up stuck and just not understanding how to move things forward. But the number one reason that we have seen innovation initiatives fail is insufficient intrapreneuriality among team leaders and team members in these innovation project teams. Intrapreneuriality is the density of entrepreneurial traits within an individual. And we'll get into quite a bit more of that in a minute. So what exactly is intrapreneurship? So the original definition was made by a gentleman named Gifford Pinchot, who I met a couple of years ago at a conference in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And he said a person within a large corporation who has a responsibility for turning an idea into a profitable finished product through assertive risk-taking and innovation. And originally, that was quite a good definition. When corporate innovation was really about spin-out creation and strict product development. And it has evolved to quite a bit more than that, as I mentioned earlier on. My definition, which I think is more holistic, is it's the application of skills, attributes, and behaviors of entrepreneurship to deliver innovation, grow revenue, and energize employees within a large organization. So the attributes of entrepreneurial people are, they combine a dreamer and a doer. They can balance vision and execution. They're optimistic. They believe that things are going to turn out well, and they're confident, not fearful. People who are driven by fear, we're all afraid of something, but people who are generally confident are much more successful at entrepreneurial activities, and most good entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs that I've met are confident people. They're creative, nimble, and flexible. Flexibility is particularly key for entrepreneurial efforts because so many things can happen unexpectedly, so many paths need to be taken, and flexibility is really key for being able to navigate those. They're risk and failure tolerant. The ability to accept that you have failed at something and move on quickly is absolutely critical because, as I've mentioned before and will again, that entrepreneurial efforts and innovation in general are rife with failure, and in fact should be, so you can figure out what doesn't work and move on to what does. So you have to be able to tolerate those things and move forward quickly. Be able to make decisions under uncertainty. This is what Northrop came to me about originally, that got me started on this path, was that people had gotten so calcified and concerned that they had to understand everything and have a clear path forward with no risk before they could decide, paralyzed them. And that's in an innovation initiative, you've got to be able to make decisions without complete information, because complete information is never available. Somebody that enjoys challenges is much more likely to be successful, and that is one of the components of an entrepreneurial mindset. Is I like challenges. I don't like things to be easy all the time. I like things that stretch me and let me grow. And entrepreneurs are resilient. They bounce back. They can take a hit and keep ticking. And they're competitive. They like to win. They like to challenge themselves and challenge others to do better. Some of the skills that entrepreneurs typically have include listening. That may sound a little funny, but listening is truly key to a number of the things that need to be done well in order to progress innovation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Identifying pain and opportunity. Now, this may tilt more towards the ideation phase, but the ability to recognize friction in a system or discomfort in a customer or need is something we call pain. You know, pain is something that someone will pay $1 to have you fix for them. So being able to put on those entrepreneurial glasses and see where there are opportunities to solve pain, reduce friction, create value, those are very critical entrepreneurial skills. Holistic problem solving, not just technical, but the people component, the organizational component, the political, being able to blend all those things in a project environment is very important. Being able to think strategically, not just tactically or technically. A number of the companies that we work with are engineering companies, defense contractors, others where the work is extremely technical, and the ability to be able to think strategically about why is this technical advancement necessary? What's the application of it? How's it going to be used? What's the larger problem being solved? And how do we create a strategy to solve that problem? That's very important as well. Navigating and transacting within the organization. Truly successful entrepreneurs are people that can find their way through the maze of their large organization and make deals. They transact. They say, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. What do you need? This is what I've got. Those are the, for those of you who remember the TV show MASH, you know, the Radar O'Reillys of the world who can find anything, anywhere within their organization and trade it, use it, create value with it. So networking goes right along with that. The ability to meet other people, find them, make allies, know who has what skills and what assets and resources, and how to work through those are critical skills for successful entrepreneurs. Storytelling, I've come to believe over my career is maybe the most underappreciated but most valuable skill for entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs. And that's because you have to be able to tell the story of why what you're doing is important, why it's valuable, what benefits will accrue to those who buy it or buy into it or help with it. Storytelling is also a critical component of culture. One of the things that makes an organization what it is are the stories that we tell each other about who we are. And people who are talented raconteurs and storytellers have a secret weapon in moving their projects forward. This is my friend, Mr. Potato Head. He represents for me aggregating. Again, that's the sort of Radar O'Reilly thing. You can find pieces and parts of disparate types in different places and scavenge them together and play Mr. Potato Head to make something new and valuable with the people and the resources, the assets that are within your grasp. And focal point shifting. This is the skill of being able to look down at the details, make sure that those are right, get the tactical bits under control, and then look up and make sure that you're headed the right direction. And the ability to shift back and forth is critical for moving an amorphous startup or innovation project forward. If you don't look up, you can end up getting the tactics perfect and end up someplace you didn't expect to be that is maybe not a good place. If you don't look down and get the minutia done, things fall apart. So it's the ability to shift back and forth at an appropriate frequency that becomes an important skill. So the behaviors of intrapreneurial people, the best ones at least, they take responsibility for their project. They don't sit around and say, hey, somebody else is going to take care of this or fix this for me, or I can just sit back and wait for someone else to make the decision. They're relentlessly proactive. They drive things forward because they need to accomplish. They hustle. It's the same thing. It's anti-laziness. It's a drive to succeed and to move things forward. And they honor their commitments, because not honoring commitments means that you have a short life expectancy as an entrepreneur, because no one will want to play with you if you have violated the commitments that you made the last time around. And they focus on customers, and those customers can be internal, they could be external, typical customers, they could be the people on your team if you're the team leader. But thinking about all the people in your domain as customers and thinking how to serve them, it's also a servant leadership thing. That is a behavior that some of the finest entrepreneurs that I've met embody. And then they're collaborative. That may be pretty obvious, but because innovation is such a team sport, collaboration and being really good at collaboration becomes extra critical. So back to my number one cause for innovation project failure being insufficient intrapreneuriality. What does that look like? What happens when you have insufficient intrapreneuriality? And these are all things that we've seen repeatedly in different venues. People are afraid to start unless the complete path is known and de-risked. So that's a typical bureaucratic organizational mindset is I can't see completely everything that's going to happen, so I can't start. And they're paralyzed by the fear of failure. And that will end any innovation initiative before it starts. Being overly focused on permission and authority. So there's a balance. You can't run completely amok, but waiting for permission or asking for permission and getting the authority for every little piece of a project means that your project will take forever. And there is a certain amount of, shoot first, ask for forgiveness later. That has to be balanced with ethics and maturity and responsibility, but in large organizations, waiting till you get permission for every single thing will make sure that your project never gets to completion. Being really challenged and having a lot of difficulty navigating the unexpected hurdles that are thrown up, the corporate antibodies or people who are blockers, who we'll talk about in a minute. If you cannot find your way around them somehow, they will stop you in your tracks. And I've seen that happen over and over. And unwillingness to reach out to people you don't know inside the company. Inside these large companies that have tens of thousands of people, there are very likely to be people that could be useful to your project, that might have knowledge, data, access, physical tools or tricks, any number of things that they could have that would be beneficial to you. But if you were afraid to reach out to them, particularly if they're at a different level within the organization, we saw numerous times people unwilling to pick up the phone and call somebody who was 2 levels up from them, who could get them something that they needed and might be very willing to do so, but they were just afraid to do it. Struggling with negotiating. People that aren't natural negotiators can sometimes have a hard time getting the support, the political coverage, the resources or access that they need. And most projects require some form of negotiation to get to completion, and just not being sure what to do next. It goes along with the first two, needing to have the complete path mapped out, de-risked, and there being no possibility of failure. But even beyond that, it's just what step do I need to take today to move this thing forward? And they also, these teams with insufficient intrapreneuriality also tend not to understand a science experiment mentality of, we don't have to roll out the $200 million final version of this thing first. We need to try something smaller. We need to iterate it. We need to learn from it, see what works and what doesn't, a number of times to end up at something big and scalable. But attacking something at full scale the first time in an innovation project is usually a recipe for disaster. So if that's the case, if that's the number one reason innovation projects fail, how do you identify the entrepreneurs that you already have within your organization? And you will likely not have many. We found a very small single-digit percentage of people who have high entrepreneuriality, but finding them can make the difference between being very successful on a number of fronts or having a number of projects fail. One way is an Intrapreneurship Assessment. So with the Smith School faculty and the Behavioral and Social Sciences College, over the last 2 or 3 years, we developed what we call the IILA, which is an individual level Intrapreneurship Assessment. And it's a 30-minute online psychological assessment that is designed to rate an individual's entrepreneuriality. It's a pretty interesting tool, and we're currently offering it to select companies at no charge to help with the scientific validation. We've got some good data so far, but we're collecting more data before we can release it as a scientifically valid tool. So that's something to consider for your organization. Speaking of science, I'm a big geek. So anyone with a high school chemistry background will remember the phase states of matter. Working inside these big organizations to improve their ability to innovate and seeing through the eyes of a lifelong entrepreneur, people struggle or succeed at moving their projects forward. This analogy occurred to me, and it's that thermal energy is equivalent to intrapreneuriality. And let me tell you a little bit more about it. It seems a little strange, but just as the increasing levels of thermal energy dictate matter's phase, going from solid to liquid to gas to plasma, so too do increasing levels of intrapreneuriality dictate an individual's ability to contribute to driving an innovation project forward successfully. Let me show you what I mean by that. So here on the vertical axis is the population, the number of people, and on the horizontal axis is those individuals' entrepreneuriality. This is a typical Gaussian curve. And we separate it into the 4 phase states of matter. So the solids are the innovation blockers, the corporate antibodies, if you will, the status quo defenders, people that don't adapt well and really fear change. Liquids, they prefer the status quo, and they might follow change, they might buy into helping with innovation, but they really rather not. Gases have a higher degree of entrepreneurial tendencies, and they're faster followers of change. And then the plasmas are the natural entrepreneurs, highly adaptable, champions of change. These lines, the vertical lines that you see between these segments, they would move based on the culture. So if you have a very static, older nonprofit, for example, where say the tenure is 30 years on average, you're going to have a lot more solids and a lot less gases and plasmas. So just imagine those green lines moving around based on the specific culture of that organization. Turns out that the people who are most useful to put training effort into are what I'll call the Proto Plasmas. They're the people right up against the line for plasmas. They're not natural entrepreneurs, but they just need a bit more help to become plasmas. And those very few plasmas that you have, they are the people who can change the outcome of your entire innovation initiatives. There's a very small population of them, as I mentioned. You want to identify them to their managers as highly valuable to the innovation initiative so that their managers understand that they have a special place. You might want to offer them lead roles in the innovation projects, and you might even want to give them sabbaticals from their existing roles so that they can spend significant time on those innovation projects. Ideally, you'd like to include them in any strategy development or innovation overall, because they're going to be the point people to help you execute. And you want to make sure that they understand from senior leadership what the future state is, what the future vision and goals and constraints really are. So even if they're fairly low down in the organization, if they're highly entrepreneurial, putting them in a room with senior leadership and getting that future vision directly from them can be very powerful and very motivating for them. You also want to connect them with the internal communications folks who can distribute the innovation storytelling that they will be helping to witness and generate. And that storytelling about the innovation initiative is critical to the culture change component we'll talk about later. The protoplasmas, the gases who are right up against the plasmas, have above average entrepreneuriality and some interest typically in being innovators, agents of change, but they need support and practice to become good at it. They make great understudies for the team leads, who might be plasmas, and they can grow into plasmas themselves. Interestingly, though, they represent the biggest bang for the buck. If you're going to spend precious corporate dollars on increasing the skill set of people who can innovate for you, they're the ones who can deliver the most bang. They need more training than the plasmas, but the improvement, and because there are many more of them than the natural entrepreneurs, they're the ones who can really lead you into the future. The gases, they buy in relatively easily if they have good leadership and good messaging and plasma team leaders, and they're going to be the bulk of your successful innovation project team members. Training is also great for them. There are many more of them, though, so it's a little harder to select out which ones are going to be the beneficiaries of that training. The liquids, not a lot to say about them really. Often they have technical roles that are necessary on the project teams, and they can evolve into gases if they get some good experience and some training. The blockers, the solids, in government and academia, I've seen them called retired in place, which always amuses me. They often self-select out of anything regarding innovation, so that's good. They do need to hear the innovation messaging quite a lot before accepting that there's any reason for change or innovation. And they can be troublesome in terms of blocking or sabotaging innovation efforts, particularly if they are higher up in the organization. So if you are tasked with facilitating innovation projects, keep an eye and provide political coverage if you can from the solids. And typically not a great use of training dollars. So how do you improve the overall win rate for your innovation initiatives? First thing is really assess the intrapreneuriality of your population. How many intrapreneurs do you have? You may have none. You could have quite a few and not know it. Training the Proto Plasmas and Plasmas together in intrapreneurship and things like the lean startup methodology, the tactics of innovation projects can be extremely useful. And you want to build these teams very thoughtfully with a mix of the different types. You would not want to put all of your plasmas in one project. Too many type A's or very driven people are going to conflict, but putting one plasma and a couple of protoplasmas and then sprinkling in the others can work out very well. And then, if possible, this is a heavy lift in many organizations, but modifying the filters and processes that human resources uses in recruiting new people to allow you to let more entrepreneurial individuals into the organization. Typically, with large organizations, they are filtered out. They often have nonlinear career paths. They've done maybe some entrepreneurial things or tried a number of different careers. For innovation and entrepreneurship, that's exactly who you want. For running the well-oiled, profit-focused machine, that's not who's typically sought after. So being able to modify those filters and letting more of those people in can benefit you in the long run. Doing an assessment and growing the entrepreneurial component of your corporate culture can also be very valuable if the intention is to continue these innovation efforts into the future and not just land on one, get that one product service process changed and then stop. But if you really are trying to become an organization that innovates and survives, then changing that culture to become more entrepreneurial is almost a requirement. And then getting the messaging right from senior leadership. And I've always been amazed at how difficult this is for many companies, but it actually should be one of the simplest things and has a tremendous effect for not an enormous amount of effort. Then finally, building up the trust quotient between employees and the organization. If you're asking your employees to lean in and give you their heart and soul and creativity and extra effort to make these things go forward, but employees don't trust the organization, they feel like they're either undervalued or over bureaucratized or any number of other untrusted situations. If they feel that way, they're not going to give you their best. And also, who wants to work in organizations where you feel untrusted? So that's something that can really help improve your win rate. So to grow that culture of entrepreneurship, here are a few tips. In assessing the organization's existing culture, you want to look at those different elements: demographics, dynamics, processes, incentives, metrics, and a number of others. But being able to create a picture of your organization's culture and understand, do we support these kinds of efforts, or do we hinder these kinds of efforts by what we believe and how we work and how we reward, is really the first place to start in changing the culture. After that, you ideally, I believe, do some sort of entrepreneurial readiness assessment or entrepreneuriality of, who do you have already? Who do you need to bring in? And then get clarity on the future state vision. What is it we're trying to innovate in? Why? Why are we going through this? Where are we trying to get to? And getting a real long-term commitment affirmed to that vision. I've sadly seen large organizations pay lip service to lofty ideals and then lose interest. And employees have seen that too. And this is not the kind of thing that will work well for innovation. This can be a very challenging one, but instilling this iterative science experiment mantra of failure is okay if we know what we're trying to get to, and if it teaches us something about how to do it better next time. That can be a tall order for big companies, but at least in small areas within the organization, that can be a critical component of changing the culture, and it has to start somewhere. So having a real strategy for changing the culture is also necessary, and the structures, the messaging, having workshops for senior management to help them understand how to change culture can be critical. Providing the support and training for the front line who has to actually execute is an important component as well. And then developing the programs, whatever they may be, communities of practice, competitions. We've seen all kinds of different programs and help set up all kinds of different programs that match the culture, but match the strategy. But you have to have the strategy first. And then starting small. Trying to change a large organization's culture all at once is impossible. You have to start small, set small fires, get success, socialize those attempts, whether they're failures or wins, make it clear that management values the effort over and over and over, and then people start to believe that that's actually the way it's going to be from now on. And then you monitor, adjust, iterate, expand, growing these things outwards with more and more people, more and more parts of the organization. Eventually, that's how you actualize a culture change. And then make it fun, because if it's not fun, it's much harder to get people to buy in. So finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can build up your own entrepreneurship muscles if you're going to be working on an entrepreneurial project. These are some of the steps that can help you. So try something completely new and different. Most of our adult lives, we don't do a lot of things that are just completely different from our normal day-to-day activities. I decided 20 years ago that I was going to learn to blow glass, and it was a tremendously valuable thing because it really opened my mind and my creativity to a whole different way of thinking than I ever had before, because I spent my early life as an engineer. And it helps you with what is often called perpetual student. I believe that's a Buddhist term of going through the world and not trying to be an expert, which is what we typically are trained to do, but approaching the world as a newbie, with fresh eyes. And fresh eyes are very, very valuable in innovation. Do something that makes you uncomfortable. Practice overcoming fear. We're all afraid of something, But practicing facing fear and overcoming it is something that will serve you well in being entrepreneurial, because eventually you'll run into something that's scary while doing one of these projects. So engage in actively listening. Go meet 5 new people, ask them about themselves, ask them a lot of questions, and then just practice hearing fully without judgment. Pay attention to what they're saying and how they're saying it and what they're trying to tell you, because listening well is really the key to interpersonal relationships of all kinds, but negotiation, transaction, collaboration, team building, all that stuff. It's fundamental, and very few people are very good at it. So barter or sell a product, no matter how small or tiny the activity, but just the practice of negotiating and transacting can be very, very useful. Offer to fix something for somebody in exchange for something else, in your personal life, and observe how that feels and what's involved, because negotiation and transaction, they happen all the time under our radar, but if we're focused on it, we could get much better at it, and that'll serve you well. So draw a map of your personal network inside the organization and practice thinking about navigating towards something you need. And that skill of understanding the environment that you're in and how to get to the resources that you need and how to talk to those people, very important. And then finally, commit to some sort of physical endurance challenge, because grit and resilience are fundamental to successful entrepreneurship. If you can do those, even a subset of those, they're a great start. There are many more, but I'll leave you there with those. I'll give you just a few seconds of some of the entrepreneurship resources that we offer. We have a case study that was written by a U.S. News and World Report reporter on the work we did in entrepreneurship with one of the Fortune 500. Be happy to provide that to you. Just request it via email. The Intrapreneurship Assessment, I mentioned the IILA. We're looking for companies who want to trial that with us. That will help move the science of entrepreneurship forward. Cultural assessments and strategy consulting for innovation, something we can help with. The messaging that I mentioned a number of times for senior leadership, we have practice in helping with. Workshops and training on these topics, and then embedding people who can actually support your project teams, or something that we enjoy doing. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope it's been of some benefit to you. And please reach out if you have any comments, criticisms, or feedback of any kind. I'd love to hear it. Thanks, and have a great afternoon, and I think we'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Dan. As he mentioned, I know we're running up right up at 1 p.m., but if you do have any questions, please type them in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will get back to you. All right. It looks like we have a few questions coming in, but since we're running out of time, feel free to email Dan after the presentation, and I will also be sending out his email address as well. So thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next webinar, which is From Spaghetti to Synchronicity, How to Grow Smart, happening next Tuesday, October 17th at noon Eastern. As I mentioned, a recording of today's webinar will be emailed and also posted to our Smith alumni website. I hope you all have a great day, and go Terps!